WMFD.com. It is Coffee Talk with Jay Fox, brought to you in part by the Cove Coffee Shop in Ontario, Ohio. And joining us on the program today, our good friend Joe Trolian, who is the Executive Director of the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board. And Joe has brought some friends to the party. Joe, I'm going to let you introduce your friends.
Absolutely. I've got Melodye James and Carla James. They are with you just told me, and
Restored Visions.
Yay!
Yay!
It's Monday. I do have my coffee
Monday,
though for the coffee talk. So,
That's a big cup, Joe.
Talk. I actually bought, my mug is the very first radio station I ever worked for, which was WDMT in Cleveland, Ohio. So that's my coffee mug from 35 years ago. Yeah. All right, so let's get started. First of all, Carla and Melodye, how did you meet Joe, and what is Restored Visions?
Okay, I met Joe years ago. For about, maybe a year or so, I was on the mental health board. And so, but even before that, I worked as kinship navigator. And of course, we were very closely connected with the mental health services and therefore with mental health board. Mm-hmm. So my career path took me in connection with some things Joe was doing. Obviously, a lot of our services were provided and led by the mental health board, mm-hmm. and paid for by the mental health board. Yeah. And then, like I said, there was a period of time when I served on the mental health recovery board. So it's been a while. We've been knowing each other in community and in services in the community for many years. So he's an old friend.
Okay, so what? First of all, the two of you look like sisters. I'm just going to say that right now.
We like you. You're our new best friend, Jay.
Well, that's okay. Yes. I need lots and lots of new best friends.
We got you. We got you.
So that being said, the question I have for you is, what does the name Restored Visions mean, and what is the purpose of the organization?
Okay. Restored Vision actually was something that I'm a woman of faith, and God dropped into my heart a concern for grandparents raising grandchildren, which has been the majority of my career work as a family life educator. And so I thought about all the services we had provided, all the activities that we had sponsored, workshops, conventions, and support groups and conferences. But I thought one day, it just popped into my mind as I was thinking, what else can I do to support grandparents raising grandchildren in our community? And the idea came into my mind, you guys haven't even prayed about them. You haven't asked me for help. You haven't asked for the help that you cannot do, but you can only ask. I thought, wow, no, we haven't. And so the name Restored Vision, restoring the dignity to family, restoring the purpose and love, restoring families as it's meant to function. And even though grandparents are raising grandchildren, that's sort of out of the developmental cycle, there's still a restoration of what all that means. And so that is sort of our focus, restoring that healthy love, vision of hope and of positivity in the lives of families. I shared it with Carla. We pulled together a group of people. In fact, our very first meeting was at the mental health board. Joe and
Sherry.
Other people were there. Mary Kay was there, yes. And they allowed us to meet there for our very first meeting with area pastors, other service people, to talk about where we would go in terms of restoring vision. And mental health, of course, is one major issue of healthy families and restoring the vision of what families ought to look like. So that's sort of the beginning of it. And Carla, of course, you know, she's my eldest. I said, Carla, look, we need you to do this. And so she said, yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's always the right answer when mom asks you to do something is yes, ma'am.
That's right.
That's right.
We're very much still old school.
It is old school. So Joe, we are celebrating Minority Mental Health Month right now.
Correct.
And when this came to pass and you learned about Restored Visions and your relationship with Carla and Melodye came into being, did you feel that the mental health services that are available in the community would be the first step in the conduit to helping Melodye and Carla achieve their vision? Because obviously, if a parent is having mental health issues, they're not capable of taking care of their children, therefore it defaults to someone else. Was that your thinking, Joe?
Well, it's a part of the thinking. I mean, of course, because I run the mental health board, that's always on the forefront of my mind. I grew up in this system here in Richland County. My first job was at Freedom Hall before they closed. I worked at the center working with kids, and I can tell you, with a lot of the kids that I worked with, especially that were coming out of the African American communities, I was working with a grandmother. In fact, some of the toughest women I've ever met.
Yes.
Not only raising grandkids, they were raising great-grandkids.
Yes.
And it was a real eye-opener for me, coming from Gallion, Ohio, and going to school in Ohio, to come here and really kind of get immersed in that cultural aspect. And so when I took over as the board, that was one of my big focus. We needed to work more as a community. I mean, when I would go out for levy campaigning, I'm having sit with local ministers of the North End Alliance and things like that, because I want to make sure that what we're doing is what people need. Because too many times I sit in my office and go, well, I run the numbers. And if you look at our numbers, access is good. We have minority population, 9.6 African American, 5% other, and our agencies for access see 13.32% African American and 3.69 of other, but we also have a large percentage of unknowns, which I always hate that. That means somebody's not bothering to report what they are. But
it's a big number.
Access-wise, we get there. But to me, it's more important than access is, are people staying in services and are people having a quality outcome from services? I mean, some people are like, well, were they successful? Define success. Success is different for everybody. So I don't want to dig that far down and say, well, they have to meet this criteria. But are people happy with the services that they're receiving? So that's more of what we want to do. And addressing minority mental health does exactly that. It starts to dig down more into the services provided, more so than just, are they making it through our door? Let me add this. Do they know it before they need it? You know,
yes. Yes.
So they at least know who to call.
And that's that stigma piece.
That's it.
Yes. Staying because they feel welcome.
So you said the phrase that pays, so now I have to tell you what that means. For those of you that don't know it before you need it is a collaborative campaign of Richland County Mental Health Board and United Way and Midstate Multimedia, among other partners. And basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to inform and disseminate information to the public so that they know, based on what their needs are, what their problems are, that there are different organizations that they can call for very specific needs. And the campaign has taken a life of its own, and we're trying to help people so that they realize, number one, they're not alone. Number two, there are services available to them. And number three, and this gets back to what you said, Melodye, is there's hope. Because without hope, there's no future, there's no possibility. So when we talk about minority mental health, what does that mean? And I'm going to ask you each to speak individually, and I may mute you so that while one is speaking, the other can't be heard. But what does it mean as a difference between just minority mental health and mental health in general? And I'll start with you.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is that just the idea of stigma. Before we can even have a conversation, a lot of times in our community, we have to get past that. And that's pretty stigmatized for us. And when I think about that, I just think about my own experience. I remember the impetus for me to kind of dig deeper into this was I was having a conversation with someone. We were talking about one of my children, and they said this. They said, well, they have a mental health illness. And I just felt so much shame like wash over me and disbelief. I'm like, no way, not my child. even, and, this is not one of my younger children. This is an older child. And, I've been dealing with, the things that I thought they were dealing with all their life. But to actually put it into that context was almost traumatic for me. And I thought to myself, wow, I've worked in the mental health field all my life. I've dealt with these diagnoses. I'm familiar with them. But if I responded like that, and I'm a professional, imagine what the rest of our community does. And so
let me ask you this, Carla. What about that phrase offended you?
I think that it was not so much the phrase, it was just what I have been taught, that we don't have mental illness, we pray. And so I just had so much pushback against it. And I know that culturally, we pretty much deal with that. We don't really talk about those things. If we are dealing with mental illness, or if we're depressed, or if we have anxiety, we'll pray. If we are on medication, we won't admit it, we won't talk about it. And so I just started thinking, wow, before we can even talk about it, we have to talk about it. We have to address the fact that we don't talk about it.
So how do you get past the concept of shame?
I think it's an ongoing work for us in our community. I think that the first thing is just the awareness, and just for me to even say it, and for others of us to even say it. So when we started having meetings, we started hearing people that we'd known in our community all our lives talk about things related to mental health that we never known. We've been in church with them. We've been, we had been in relationship and had friendships with them. And just that ideal that we never knew these things about them was just further show the need to get past this and kind of address it. And I think the biggest thing and the first step is just having those conversations and just talking about it. But it's got to be a safe place because it's so stigmatized for us in our culture.
Is it generational? Is it easier for the younger generation to accept and harder for the older, or vice versa? Or how does that work?
I don't know that, Mom, and you can pipe in. I don't know that it's generational. I think it's across the board, because I want to almost say the younger generation it's more stigmatized. You'd be surprised at some of the things the younger generation has said, but they just don't even believe in that concept at all. That's my experience.
Do you feel the same way, Melodye?
Yes and no. I think that I'm thinking right now about some experiences in my family of origin. And looking at it now, I know we need some mental health services, help. But again, it was something where we kept it in family. We didn't talk about it. We certainly didn't get help. And to get help, we certainly didn't go to the dominant culture. And so, but when I think about minority mental health, I think about a holistic thing, that I can't be fully healthy and whole if part of me is not well. And so I'm always concerned about pushing toward being whole. My body affects how I feel. My feelings affect how my body is. My emotions affect it all, and my spirit.
The mind, body, and spirit triangle.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Yes.
So that's a fascinating issue for me. And also when I think about the generational thing, yes, there's a lot that we carry from our generational lenses. But then as we get older, this child Carla was talking about lived with me and my husband for years. So not only his struggles, and again, we didn't define that as a mental health issue, but his struggles affected me, my husband's, our relationship, everything about the family. And so the concern for the family is my central figure, my central idea. How can we be healthy if there's something roaming around in our family that won't go away, the elephants in the room, but we just sort of sidestep it all the time? How can we be healthy and realize the heights to which we can rise if we don't address some major issues? So yes, there's a generational thing, the messages that we give that we ignore, and just sort of soft pedal around the issues instead of being proactive, say, look, we got enough strength among us. We're going to fight this thing to the end, and we're going to stand together to get it done. So it's that family unit that is so critical for me. It's so important. Right. And I want us healthy and I want us well.
So you'll appreciate this. My grandmother used to have a saying. She used to say that if you sweep enough dirt under the rug, eventually the rug will bubble up and you'll trip over it.
That's great.
I love
Isn't that a good one?
Yeah, that's good. I like
All right. Let me turn. Sure, please tell a story. Then we're going to turn to Joe.
About something, Mom. I don't know. You don't mind me telling it, but when you talk about generational, so I'm going to go back and say, yeah, I think it probably is a little generational because it's passed down. And Mom, I remember one time when I was thinking about, look at her, she's looking at me.
What's she gonna say?
She's like, what am I gonna say? It's not gonna be. Yeah. But just to kind of highlight that generational piece and how we have passed that stigma down. I remember one time I was much younger and I was thinking about getting some counseling, and there was something that I thought had came up that I thought I needed to address. And my mother told me, well, I think I may have remembered something like that, but I think the Lord took it away from me. I prayed and he repressed my memory or took it away. Is that okay, Mom? Look at her. She's looking at me. I want to make sure I don't get in trouble after this.
Okay.
No, but that just highlights how we pass those messages down. And I'm sure that her mom told her something very similar because I got those messages from her mom too. And so we do pass those messages down that the Lord will just take the trauma away or to just pray. Mm-hmm. And certainly not discounting the power of prayer, but when do we understand that we need to pray and maybe get some help? Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And to know when you need that help before you need it.
Right.
There you know when you're on that slippery slope to destruction.
All right.
And stop the train.
So let me ask Joe the same question I asked you, and let's make sure we can unmute you. Well, for some reason, there we go.
Apparently, I have to agree to being unmuted.
Well, that's right. Now I've muted everyone else. So what does minority health, mental health mean to you? How does it differ from general market?
Well, again, and I'm going to kind of dovetail off the story that was just shared. It's very systemic, and we need to work as a whole and as a community. I had I'm not going to share any names, but I had a minister that I was working with one time. Great guy, still practicing today. And he had shared with me that he's very interested in minority mental health. And he said, when I have a parishioner that comes to me and it's in a mental health crisis, I want him to first come to church and I want him to get right. Then we're going to work on getting him into counseling. And I said, I love that concept, except for the fact that what you've just done is associated that maybe he's just not right with the Lord, and that's where the mental illness is coming from. I said, we want to work on all of this together. I believe that faith is a huge component to people getting better. I believe work is a huge component to people getting better. It's not just going and seeing the right counselor. It's not getting on the right medications. There's a whole globalistic approach to dealing with mental health. But we have to almost look at how we've been approaching it for generations. And the African-American community, I can give you stuff on all of the different cultures and how different people approach it. But that's always been what we deal with our stuff in-house first. Right. If we get to the point where we can't deal with it in-house, then we're going to bring in additional assistance. But we also know from a research perspective, the sooner we can intervene on a mental illness, the better the outcomes. The more likely we can get somebody down a road to recovery quicker with less interventions and more long-lasting good outcomes. So it's almost a catch-22. We want to support that idea that at least the community is getting involved, but we also don't want the community to portray that having a mental illness might be a faith issue. Mm-hmm. We want these are biochemical issues.
So let me unmute Carla so I can ask this question. So if it is a faith issue, can pastor help us in his sermon, in her sermon, by talking about it? Mm-hmm. Because if pastor says it's okay to get help,
right,
then it's okay to get help.
There you go. Absolutely. Right. There you go. So you understand some of the dynamics of our culture where our faith community and our pastors are very influential and very important. And like you said, if pastor acknowledges that it's an issue and talks about it, then that'll open up that conversation. And we will be more willing to say, okay, let me look at it. So yeah, absolutely.
So we need to get to Yolanda Adams, and instead of open your heart, we need to say make the call.
Absolutely.
So we have a new song coming.
Yeah, but we've got to do both in our community, because even our faith community, there's, two schools of thought, and there's a divide there. So I think that we have to have some type of combination of both. We cannot discount the faith and the prayer, because there are still pastors, and there will always be, who just, across the board believe that God can heal it. God can heal everything. So we've got.
Let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Because there is mental health and there is pastoral and spiritual care. How can we bring the two together?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, you go.
Please.
All right. I think that's a very good insight and question.
Yeah. That's good.
How can we bring those two together? Number one, there needs to be an education across the board. As Joe says all the time, there are many paths to recovery. And when we understand that, we're not saying that you can't include your spirituality in recovery and in health. We're saying it's a part of health. And that we can't, to get the best results and best outcome, let's include all the helps that we can. When I go to the doctor about my body, he might says, well, you need to go to the specialist, but come back to me and let me know what he said, and we'll work together and, set up a plan to get you to your best place of physical health. It's the same thing with our wholeness, with our whole body, with our whole person, that we've worked with our pastor and other pastors, and we've said some of the things you can do is talk about, have a depression month and talk about what depression looks like. These are the resources in our community. This person is someone you can contact. Here's a hotline. Here's a screening that you might take with a person who can read it and diagnose whatever might be going on, and just talk through even some personal issues, being self-reflective and being willing to share your personal issues. Some days I don't want to get out of bed either, but when does it become a time when I say I need help with getting out of bed?
So let me ask this question. Sometimes in church, there are times where we do not have a service, but we meet together as a congregation to hear from a speaker.
Yes.
Would it be possible to have a mental health speaker and pastor together at the same time addressing the congregation?
Absolutely. In fact, our pastor and his wife both have been trained as NAMI trainers.
Yes. For
that specific person. And we held the first specifically minority NAMI class, family to family class in Richland County last year, led by our pastor and his wife. So that's the kind of atmosphere we're trying to develop and trying to foster. That yes, our pastors can be equipped, number one, learn themselves, get the experience they need. And our pastors, when they went through the training with NAMI, Mary Kay Pierce, when they went through the training, they came back saying, wow, we thought about so many personal issues. I thought about my cousin, our pastor's wife said. And so they learned some things, and they now are trainers to be family to family trainers. And we're planning to even go further in that process. So
Joe, let me ask you this question. What is the advantage to these very positive steps being taken in the African American community, bridging the pastor with NAMI? How does that impact Richland County mental health in general?
Well, for any culture that we work with, what we want to look at is who in the culture seems to be the driving force. Who are the people who I'm going to get help? Because nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what, I'm making my phone call today. Just thought it'd be a great idea to start getting some help. There's usually a whole litany of people behind them that are going, you need to get help. What can I do to help you? We have found in the Black communities, the pastors are truly, I mean, if they say you need to get help, they get help. And so the fact that we've been able to get a family to family class started is huge, because that is a great way for people. They know that they have a loved one who's got some problems, And you don't have to have a loved one in treatment
Right.
in order to participate in family to family. You just have to recognize that your family's got some.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're getting the education. They're learning that this is not a moral issue. These are brain chemistry issues, and that there's help. What I see happening is we're going to start seeing people getting help sooner, as I had mentioned earlier. The quicker we can get people into services, the better. What I'm also hoping is people are more willing to share what their experiences are, because I always say every agency, they're required by their licensure that they have to do a client satisfaction survey. It's usually 4 questions on a piece of paper. The only people who fill it out are the people who are really, really happy with services or who really, really hate the services.
That's right.
I want the ones in between, the ones who say, I got a lot out of it, but here's a couple things you might want to do differently. And so we're looking at new ways that we can kind of get people. We've done some focus groups. We've done, each one of the agencies now have to have a different type of feedback loop other than the client satisfaction survey. And that can either be a focus group, a standing committee of families and people with lived experience that are getting their services, but something to give them some feedback that says, hey, this is what we really like that you're doing. This is what isn't working so much. And that's going to start working with that retention and satisfaction piece. Like I said, I can tell how many widgets we're producing. I can't tell the quality of them.
So in the last couple of minutes that we have, I'm going to pose a final question to each of the 3 of you. If we could wave a magic wand and make one thing happen for minority mental health issues, whether it's cost or the workforce, what would that magic wand wave be like? And I'll start with you, Carla. You want to see one thing change. Here comes the genie. What are we asking for?
I think I'm going to say the biggest thing would be for us to start talking about it and the awareness and the decrease in the stigma.
Okay. Melody?
Mm-hmm. Culturally relevant practitioners and services. A resource of those who really understand the cultural issues that Joe is talking about, that we're mentioning here, and can provide the kind of services that with that wonderful thing of understanding behind.
So let me make sure I understand, Melody. Do they have to come from within the community, or do they just have to understand the community?
Both and.
Okay.
Both and.
So either or would be fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Joe, we're waving the magic wand. What do you want?
To me, it comes down to almost a cash flow piece. I need the money to be able to retain those great people that are coming out of the community, because we lose them to Cleveland, Akron, Toledo, Columbus, and in mid-Ohio, I always say Richland County, we're a tweener county. We're too big to be small and too small to be big. Sometimes we don't have the resources. I mean, what I can have an agency pay here, they can pay 3 times as much if you go an hour north or an hour south. And so we lose a lot of people that when they're just starting out. We get people back when they're seasoned and they've been in the system and money's not at the big driver anymore. But we really need those young folks, because that's where we miss it. That's where we're missing a whole generation, because if they come in, they're seeing somebody who's in their 50s or getting ready to retire, as opposed to seeing a 20 or 30 something clinician that's very energetic, very ready to work with and understands their culture, because we lose them to the bigger cities.
Yeah. I think
So demographic specific counseling of the people, by the people, for the people.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Hey, I want to thank our guest, Joe Trolian from Richland County Mental Health, Carla James and Melody James from Restored Visions. My name is Jay Fox. You've been watching Coffee Talk on WMFD.com. It is a function and a service of WMFD TV News. It is sponsored by the Cove Coffee Shop and can be found on the website, WMFD.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we will talk to you next time on Coffee Talk.